Thank you everyone, Leslie, for inviting me to talk here today, to the sponsors. One must always thank sponsors. To all of you for braving the cold, but yet it's not so very cold, but thank you. But as always, a very special thank you to all who make up my studio, both past and present. So as you can tell, I'm a little anxious. I'm a little anxious. But you know, talking to a home crowd is always quite a challenge. I think much more so than not. And it's been a while, as Salma pointed out. I'm very relieved not to be talking, well, to be talking before Mr. Big and Sir, and the big sirs. And I'm excited because of what Leslie has just spoken about, which is that I'll be showing something new. Some of the works of KOA that I have not previously believed to be architecture, since they were not built works. And for this, again, I must thank Madame Loco. And this is where you stole my thunder. I have to say that this series of lectures, the discourse around it, the students' work that is being produced, Steph is now part of our studio, has been enormously influential in kind of changing that perception for me. So it doesn't have to be a built edifice to be architecture, which bizarrely is quite a new concept for me. So I will not be showing you any of the many works that KOA built prior to my Sophia Gray lecture in 2013. Instead, I will be showing you some competition entries and other unbuilt work, 3 houses in 3 different security estates, some of them not built, and then 3 recently completed built projects. I will discuss how the ideas investigated in the unbuilt and competition work informs built work and vice versa. There are 3 dominant themes in the work: that of landscape, be it natural as you find it, enhanced or manipulated, and fabricated. The idea of heritage, be it built heritage, environmental or cultural heritage, and then the touchy-feely of space. How space affects, creates, and accommodates the emotional or human requirements of its occupants. Right, water. Dangerously close to the computer. But first, the matter of the African craft market. There it was, built while I was pregnant with Paloma, bejeweled with beautiful artworks by Marco Cianfinelli. And then poof, gone, demolished. And in its place, Woolies, forever Woolies. Is it still architecture? Was it ever? But perhaps on a more interesting note, the competition. So the first one that I will be talking about is the Accord Peace Centre. This was a competition done in 2006, where I worked with Jenny Whitehead and Nina Sanders, all 3 of us having come from Durban, and that's how we knew each other. Our competition entry won first place, along with Design Workshop, but guess what? It was never built. And so it's been sitting in our drawer for years, but it's quite a wonderful competition because whenever we do, or often when we do other competitions, we refer to it. So I think also that's why I've kind of started with it. Accord is an organization that engages in conflict resolution, specifically in Africa. So the project deals with, it is on the bluff in Durban, which anyone coming from Durban knows is very significant, and it's this kind of headland, this big piece of earth that projects into the sea. And very important for us was the kind of significance of this bluff as a natural heritage, and as a kind of silent witness to a lot of things, accessible actually only to very few, because it was a military base or a kind of army occupied, and with underground bunkers and tunnels traversing through the headland. So throughout this project, we kind of investigated ideas of revealing and concealment. So very much in terms of working with the ideas of what metaphors for what Accord were to do within this building. The 3 primary design generators, which you see very clearly there, were the ideas of one being excavation, so we can not have to in any way influence the kind of profile of the bluff. Also the idea of delving in to reveal the truth, to unearth the truth as a metaphor for what the Accord Peace Centre is all about, what the work is that they will be doing there. And then a very strong idea about landscape. I just sort of refer you to these three things, so that these three ideas are kind of constantly through the competition entry that kind of reiterate each other, which I think is quite valuable in terms of competition entries, that you make very clear what it is that you're doing. So the landscape, referring to the natural landscape of the bluff, that the whole area sort of to the south of, not to the south, but towards the sea becomes this kind of landscaped area. You actually get to it via ferry from the Durban coast, and then you walk up this landscape. That is as a visitor, which would be all around a kind of museum to the victims of the violence, that they would be remembered in that way. And then a very key part of it, are these sentinels, which you see there. So the only thing sticking out of the bluff are these sentinels to kind of as watchers over, as guardians, or standing vigil on the side of the bluff. So then the next competition entry, which was done, so that was in 2006, and this Hostels for Hope was a project we did last year. And it was the site was on the coast of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. What it is that there is this old hospital there. Well, not old, as in it's been there for many years. It's not old, it's in good repair. But and this is the main cancer hospital in Tanzania. Tanzania, thank you, madam. And so what we were doing on this in this project was to make a place for women to stay, because often when they come for cancer treatment, they in fact don't come because the journey to and from the hospital is so long and arduous, and the period over which they need to be undergoing treatment is kind of often up to 6 months. So the idea is to make a place where they can stay while they are undergoing treatment, and then usually with a caregiver who's with them. So it is it's in the grounds of this main hospital, and it has a wonderful view out. It's just, if you see the one up from the bottom photograph, that is a view from the hospital looking out towards the sea. So in quite a beautiful place that you could kind of use towards nurturing and making a comfortable and well, sense of well-being, and a very lovely place for these women to be. So one of the kind of key ideas behind it, and you'd need to sort of follow through the plan to see it well, but we traditional Swahili architecture was used as one of the guides, if you like, as to how to arrive at the forms of what we did. So for example, the entrance is not direct at all. It's very much a hidden entrance, and this idea of layers of privacy. So you enter into a reasonably public space. From that you move into a less public, more private space, etc., so that you can afford women places where they can be discreet, quiet, and screened, or they can choose to participate in the community of the other women sharing the facility. And I guess that is also very much a way that Islamic cities are designed. So something that's long been an interest of mine is that whole thing of privacy and not seeing into people's private spaces, and how that benefits, and creating a place that makes the women feel comfortable and therefore able to recover from what is really rather hectic treatment. Not in a completely dissimilar vein, but I forget the date, you see, you tricked me, 2013, they were the other way around. Okay, it's Climb Any Mountain. And Climb Any Mountain is a not-for-profit organization that they were the hosts of this competition. It was in Pietermaritzburg. So this is the design for our entry design for a transitional living center. The idea being that people with mental illnesses and disabilities can live here in order to learn to be independent, if you like, so that they can then integrate in a bigger community. And the building has been very specifically designed. So when you enter, that sort of very large space is where you enter into, which is the kind of communal pavilion where you would have visitors and dinners and that kind of thing, should you want to. And then these individual units are the units where the individuals would be living. And so they're kind of designed to be almost like their own little houses. But then there's this collective roof that gathers them into this kind of collective umbrella. And you will see also that they've been positioned in the site quite loosely, but around a courtyard. The geometry is shifting to accommodate existing trees, topography, that kind of thing. And then at the same time creating what some people might refer to as leftover space. So where you see these little hearts, it's cheesy, but that's very much of how, that's their kind of logo. If we go back to that, you see top left-hand side was their kind of conceptual thinking of the space that they wanted. And so these moments of kind of opportunity, so the leftover spaces become opportunities for interacting with other people, but at the same time it's very easy then to retreat, if you like, back into your own unit, should you not, be in a position to want to be in a more public realm. And then also the whole idea of beauty, so that the gardens, that the courtyard and the gardens around are planted. There is a veggie garden, so we chose not to have that belongs to the greater, it's a kind of a home for people with mental disabilities. And so we chose to do something that was more around working with indigenous plants that are scented, that are beautiful, that are kind of uplifting in that way. And so it's quite a sensory experience, this building. Also down to the materials that were chosen to be used. And I think ideas around scale in both this project and the project before, very important. So then this project is a whole lot of fun. It is in Zanin, as it says, which is in Limpopo province. And I guess it's our response to a mall. Whoops. It's what we called an African shopping experience. So the whole idea is really around fabricating a landscape. So if you look at this image, this was the site. That's the site kind of at large, but it was this big expanse of flat sand that ostensibly was a parking lot. And up to the top there, that big road that runs through it goes from Palabora and Maputo running through this way to Polokwane. And there's this kind of trickle of a river that runs, not river, it's a spruit that kind of runs through it. So those being, and also the fact that in that part of the world it's a sort of subtropical environment and plants grow like weeds. So we used all of these devices to create an environment, to manufacture, if you like, or to fabricate an environment into which we put this shopping centre. Very much around the idea of experiential shopping. So on the big main road, that's kind of diagrammed as the general layout. The big main road are the very large buildings that are the sort of warehouse buildings where you might have Mr. Price and the likes. And then moving between that building, and we had to, of course, dam the river so that we could actually have a waterfront. And then planted heavily, grows like weeds, and then in that, these pavilions that become these sort of more boutique kind of shops where so if you look at that, that's kind of the general layout. So it's about manufacturing something to create a whole, there's the model of it. And I think for me what's also very interesting about this is that this project we were briefed, we conceptualized it, we built models, we drew it, etc., all in the space of 2 weeks. Up to Zanin, back down to Zanin, back up again. And so then it also uses ideas around what we called urban markers, the idea of billboards being something that you see at speed, which has to do with the building you'll see just now. Towers, making things legible, very common as an urban marker. Bridges. And of course then the famous Ponte Vecchio, clearly we needed one in Zanin. So if you look at this section, you'll see how they're the big warehouse kind of shops that are on the very fast street, the more intimate ones that are on this, within this kind of forest that we created, and then the waterfront with the Ponte Vecchio going across there and apartments on the other side. So we won this actually, and we started doing working drawings, but then it all kind of petered out because there was the town planning issues and stuff. But that is the building that's the warehouse, the kind of building at speed is what we've called it. And then the landscape of with these pavilions within the very planted or and subtropical kind of environment, and then images there of the model. So then the Terraplane Offices, not a competition, but a project that was also unbuilt. It is actually in Parktown North, but on the, just down from the corner of Jansmats Avenue and 7th Street. This is the site over there. I'm showing views from the site. And you'll see that the neighbours surrounding are unattractive, to say the least. The Standard Bank building on the corner is probably the one that you'll recognise. So given that it's this long panhandle site, the diagram at the top would probably be what would be, I guess, my autopilot to a building that is surrounded by unattractive buildings, I suppose, and to kind of make your own courtyard that you make your own views within that. But given the town planning regulations, it's only possible to have this island building. And so what we did with that was to create the idea that if you, different ways of viewing things. So if you take this terrible building but you cut it up into little pieces, that you will have, you know, an image that is a lot more attractive than if you have to see the whole. Or if you put an object in your near view that you can focus on, that the ugly building will become out of focus. And that you can see there in the section. And then in this middle portion, you see it says view like that. So that's the one, and then this other one out the side here, where there's a planted edge, because you can plant right up to an edge, although you can't build right up to an edge. So from that view, you create that look up by planting the roof and the beautiful blue sky of Joburg. You create this, what for me is the typical Highveld vision of a view. And then the planting that goes on the edge and how, you know, views through that then enable you to see your rather unattractive neighbours. The idea of folded space, so that the company for whom it was done is an ad agency, so they do work together, and that there's kind of communication between all levels on account of this kind of folding of space. So you see that again. And then with the planted edge that has got some holes in it, if you like, in order to see buildings differently, to fabricate how you see them. Okay, so secure estate living, which is it's the idea of the big house, which we can discuss with Jalan later. But so I think that you get these estates, and in many ways, as an architect, you think to yourself, gosh, should I really be doing any buildings in here? Can one produce a decent building in these security estates, many of them with some very weird rules, etc. So, you know, I mean, I've had my very own aversion to building in these estates, but these three projects, I think, have kind of reassured me that things are possible. So the first house that I'll show you is House Schutter, which is in Four Ways at the Helderfontein estate. And what I'm going to do is just read to you some of the rules, because these estates are full of them. Architect's nightmare. So it goes like this. House forms must be simple rectangular or composite rectangular. Is this a new style, one wonders? Frontages must be parallel to the street. And then there's this peculiar thing of a minimum house size. Minimum house size of 300 square meters. Roofs must be dominantly pitched in form, with symmetrical double pitch that must be more than 17.5 degrees, etc., etc. So luckily our site, I mean it's peculiar, luckily our client had bought 2 stands, the green one, and that there is the Yixkay River. So they bought 2 stands, and then it kind of goes onto this common land and then further onto the river itself. This way is the river and that way is the street, and you see we are parallel to the street. Actually quite unwittingly, because I didn't know that was a rule. I'm very bad. The rules get read by others and then I kind of follow on with them. Can we have this and are we allowed that? So the idea behind this was to push the building kind of further to the, so I mean maybe 2 steps backwards. A couple, her older son who'd been homeschooled, relatively conservative people, I would say. He's an actuary. She's actually a lawyer, but doesn't work. And then I said to them, so, you know, please give me a brief. And they wrote this, like, I don't know, 10-page brief, which is very interesting. And I think the thing about it that was interesting was that they told me all the things they wanted, but they didn't once tell me how to make them. And for me, that was a fantastic brief. So they are very different from me as people, but somehow or other one needs to kind of access that in order to be able to design someone a house. So one of the things that this house does is that it's dug into the ground so that it's not so high and towering from the road. And then you'll see that we've got these planted roofs that she kept all the seeds from the felt grass that was there, and then we replanted them once the roofs had been done, so to sort of recreate the land on which it was built. Just before we go further on, you can see top right hand is lots of trees, and this coincides with this green belt that kind of runs through the property, and then we've reinforced that with more planting, and so you can kind of go from the Yixkay River. There is a fence, but it's a fence so you can see through it, and animals can move freely through that and through the kind of property. And they do have mongoose. She's crazy for them. She gets little tidbits all the time, and she goes through 6 kilograms of bird food every week or something. It's quite frightening, but anyway. So I won't go through that in detail, but you can see our evenly pitched roof, very good. And also that those had to be only a percentage, so we were allowed to have some flat roofs, which were the ones that were planted primarily. And then bizarrely, the cottage on the left-hand side, ask Nicolette, I don't know how we did that one, but we got that one. There are no fences, which I think is really nice. There are side walls, but there are no fences between, so you move quite freely between the structures. There you see how it's kind of settled down so that it doesn't kind of poke up too high. And then views over the planted roofs showing you the pitched roofs, yeah. And then inside the entrance hall, so this is a rammed earth wall, but we put on the inside in order actually to protect it, which is quite interesting, because of how, I suppose that they don't have long eaves overhangs. So it's really a thing of more of beauty and of tactile quality than it is necessarily of a sustainable architecture. This building is, though, however, completely off the grid in terms of Eskom, because in fact a week into their living there, the Eskom cut them off, and ever since then they've never had Eskom, so it operates entirely on solar panels. This kind of link between all these more kind of larger formal spaces. The library, the kitchen, so also just all these kinds of things within the space of the joinery, etc., that we detail these, get them built, etc. And I think it's just a very lovely quality of light and of colour and warmth. And also there's this thing which Daniel noticed, often when you go into a 2-story house, the ground floor is kind of 3 meters high, and then the upstairs is 3 meters high, plus this pitched roof. So actually the less kind of public spaces are very tall, and the public spaces are very short. So the bedrooms are tall and the public spaces are very short. So we've kind of tried to do the reverse there. So you can see here, which is at the top of the double volume entrance area, that is about 2.1 to the underside, 2.2 to the underside of those beams. So in fact you come into quite a compressed space as you come up the stairs. And the downstairs is more like 3.5 meters high. So that by the time you have your volume over your pitched spaces, that is not towering. It's kind of a bit more intimate as a bedroom space. The swimming pool, which was designed so the dog couldn't fall in it, but tragically the dog died before it even came to be in the garden. That was very sad. Daisy. And then the cottage. So this is my idea. I don't love the outside of the building, and I find the steelwork very harsh because she won't grow anything on it. She's very, very neat freak. So I like the photographs taken way back, so you sort of see the trees and the building kind of nestling in it. So then moving on to House Blanc, which is also in an estate, and their house is on 3 Jacaranda Lane. No desperate housewives, you know, could have been wisteria, but all the same. And actually this estate is quite, the rules were not very onerous, except for the colour on the exterior. And I think also the other onerous thing with the other architects in the estate. So a very important part of this, there is the estate, and you can see our little building here and the other buildings there. I mean, the one sort of slightly diagonally across barely sort of fits onto the site. And I think this for me is one of the awful things about these houses on these estates, is that they become absolutely colossal. And so very important in our design, and you can see also that our property's got all its trees still, and we've built the building. Whereas where everybody else is built, you can see, gone, all the trees are gone. So the building was very much built around what was naturally there. And hence this party diagram. Another thing that I've learned is party diagram, is this walkway that connects the spaces. So this is the street, the road where you enter, and the buildings kind of are fitted between these existing trees, making courtyards, etc., between them. I mean, it's quite clear, I think, how that works, so that we could retain all the existing trees and then add some. So you can see all along the top there is where we added more trees, and some of them very tall and already quite well grown, so that we could screen the neighbours. And what was very lovely for me when the assessors or judges came to see it the other day, they said, "Is this a big stand? What is the size of your stand?" And in fact, the reverse is true. Our stand is the size of anybody's, but it's our building that is somewhat more modest than most of the others. And so for me, that you feel that within the space, I think is very important. The 2 barns, really, pitched roofs, good girl, that you've got a double, like quite a large volume here, simple space, with the public lounge, dining, kitchen, etc. And that is the sleeping wing and the more kind of intimate spaces. So it's a 2-story building, but with lower floor-to-floor, floor-to-ceiling heights, which you see very clearly in those sections. And then this walkway that is made of this uneven rhythm of timber columns that in a way is to be like a kind of forest, I guess, interpreted in that way, and very open and see-through. So there you see the public barn, and then looking through from that to the other double story of the bedroom wing, looking one way with the kitchen to the one side. And then also kind of I've got to read you this phrase because it's very nice. Bursts of rebellion. So the color, we wrote this, bursts of rebellion against the good taste tyranny of the estate guidelines. And I think in a way that's what that is. Sadly, we don't have a picture of the garage, but the garage is completely pink. So that if the garage door opens, like these neighbors are going to get this complete shock, but it's this very quiet, well-behaved grey on the outside. So it has this yellow being one of them, and there are these kind of bursts of colour that happen within this otherwise, I think, quite quiet space. And this is a boisterous family, love their children, they ride their tricycles or skateboards or whatever it is all over the house. And it's kind of always a party. And it's just a very happy home. And it was also a fantastic contract where we had a wonderful contractor, happy clients, happy architects. And I think that's an incredible, it's special. you know, I think it's definitely, it's worth it. It's good. It kind of just makes it all so much easier. And then the courtyard with the trees as they were existing. Family room, staircase. So the staircase upstairs. And another thing is that their children are quite wild. So they kind of, we had to struggle to keep them off the building site and not sort of leaping onto piles of sand. And they're quite comfortable with that, so I suppose. So this here is the mezzanine with the balustrade around that is above the kids' bedroom. And you can see again these bursts of colour. But just remember the mezzanine, because here in the boys' bedroom, that is their fireman's pole. So above there is their mezzanine, and then they slide down into their bedrooms. And those cupboards open, their bathrooms behind them. In the courtyard space, so the tree coming along there, that tree did exist, and then there's another one that's been moved in there. So there you see some of the existing trees, and the single story of the one space and the double story of the other further on from that. And then I love this photo, this kind of gentleness of how they've just inhabited the space. They put their fairy lights up, there's kids' stuff all around. It's just a really very happy home. The next project is at Monaghan Farm, which is an estate, but I think probably, okay, we'll keep these. That's their motto, not mine, respecting the environment and celebrating the scenery. And I think that Monaghan Farm is in many ways one of the more successful of these estates. There's a lot of space. Their restrictions are kind of 25% coverage, single-story buildings, so that there's lots of space between, and then there's lots of common space and lots of open space, which I think is quite unusual in these other estates. But I love this, apropos of their rules. Under the subject, a very short word on modern architecture. It's quite a long word, but nonetheless, this is the list towards the end, which is just, I mean, it's fantastic. We say no to, blah, 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 Zaha Hadid groupies. Whoops. But if you like, you should be all right. I mean, I think it's absolutely hilarious. But I guess then they make no bones about the fact that they are, the aesthetics committee has a very personal view on things, and they will, or, it's fantastic. So here is part of the Monaghan estate and our site, which is this one. So you see that is one that's kind of currently under construction, as is that one. And you can see all the space in between. So that space there and that space there will never be built on. The land falls away towards, I think a stream runs there when it rains a hell of a lot, but nonetheless there are these really rather lovely views. Okay, so this is, the idea behind this, again, they kind of encourage you to use berms to settle the building into the ground to kind of screen it, etc. So what we've done is, following the contours, etc., buried the building down, but it kind of opens up towards the north and towards the view. These solid pieces within the building are the ones that determine, that's terrible, I've got to go very fast. They make spaces that leave over for what are the positive spaces. So those are used to then create the space. And then this is a model that we built off it, and I think what for me is very interesting, again, quite a conservative client, but look at that roof. And luckily, we now have Revit. Poor Nicolette has been drawing this building. I tell you, without it, we would not have been able to produce it, but I stay well away from those Revit drawings. So then this is very funny for me. This is now a Whale Rock Ridge, a project where we're now doing a new house, but I had to read this to you. Traditionally, architecture can roughly be placed into two categories, no full stops, no breathing, relating to the overall building form. In the one instance, the treatment of the walls can determine the character of the building and have dominance over the roofing. Examples of these are mainly to be found in the Western classical architecture. The opposite to this is often seen in traditional Eastern architecture, i.e. the temples, pagodas, etc. Here the roof forms the dominant feature in the design. The latter of the two seems to be the more appropriate approach for the architecture phase 2 and 3 of this development. I mean, it's extraordinary that the English isn't even working for us. There's the man there who's been in practice some 58 years. He's going to keep an open mind when we submit, but he sounds shocked that I wanted to know if the roofs had to be double pitched or if a mono pitch constituted pitched. So the next 3 projects. So the first is my little red house. I have to do time, so I've got fast. Are we all okay still? Good. So this building is falls into the category of what I've previously called constructions for self, where I experiment in 3D, a bit like building a very big model. In certain ways, there is a similarity between this and the mode of making architecture, between this mode of making architecture and that of competition entries. Both can be quite experimental, both are quite expensive to the practice, and both reference and influence the work of the practice. So this is a 1930s arts and crafts style suburban house in Parktown North that now finds itself on a busy feeder road. I bought it, this is how I bought it doesn't look like this anymore. I bought it with the intention of making it into our studio. In the hands of a developer, my little gingerbread house, as Paris calls it, would probably have been demolished and who knows what built. Instead, my fascination with heritage buildings meant I chose to work with the historic fabric, to enhance and adapt it to suit a new function. So if you look at this, this is how I found the house with swimming pool. And those are the parts that we then demolished, some of them being kind of odd additions and some of them being in order to create a much more open central space. And then the house, which is the part on the right, those are the outbuildings on the left, has this quite sort of formal, quite symmetrical sense about it, but it's got this missing corner. So onto the missing corner we then added it's known as the red box. So that out of the house we could then make this space that had, that you would enter formally from the front door and through an entrance lobby. That's the red box that we then built on. Can I just make it jump on? Excellent. And then we took out the middle of the building in order to make this big central space that became, I guess it's the kitchen, which is the heart of the home, but it's also kind of the area where people gather, etc., as a working space, and that was where we worked. To the left-hand side is the red box that we added on that became the boardroom. So you can see how in part it is restored. These become individual office spaces that can be used as such, and then the kind of collective of the reception area. So there is the little red box, little gingerbread house restored. And now I'll go quite fast because this shows you the build-up of how the red box was built. So the part that's the boardroom. And throughout there is this, that's the inside of it, this attention to detail, to materials, to very much in keeping with the thinking of the arts and crafts movement. So then the next phase was to deal with the outbuildings. The idea behind this was the idea of a barn. So ostensibly a barn is a structure that houses, an agricultural structure that houses animals, hay, whatever that might be. So we chose then to, if you like, house the existing outbuildings in a barn. So it becomes this working spaces within this bigger structure. The idea of encapsulating it. Is it going to go? It goes. Okay. So then you can see the kind of link between the two, which becomes this courtyard that you can also work from. And then the two-story barn, outbuildings at the bottom, with the space that you can circulate around that holds all the sort of services, etc. Here we go again with this. Fast enough, too fast, too slow. The kind of build-up of how that space was made. And nice to look at the trees. So that's the space between, and then the view from the outside, kind of still under construction, so you can see the two. The space between the existing structure and the one that encapsulates becomes circulation, services, etc. So also a very strong part of the whole idea of the arts and crafts movement was that of well, there was a whole lot of very strong gardeners at the time, English gardeners, and I guess the relationship between how you use that space and relate to the garden. So the garden became very central to one of my interests of this building. And then that's the kind of connection between the two. So the next project, Wits Rural Facility, which is again in Limpopo province, and it's part of Wits campus, but it's their rural facility. And at the Wits, so it's an amazing facility where there's kind of an ability to have unusual experiences of how to teach, spaces to teach in. So here is this incredible natural environment. Somebody must do the dicking here. And there is an existing training facility where you can, so students go and stay there and then they interact with the communities beyond. It's a teaching facility at the same time it's about engaging with the community. So students who might be doing medicine or teaching or something could then go and work in rural communities and give skills and gain skills. And so this property, there was already an existing facility there, you can see, gorgeous thatch. And so we then chose, but it's an incredible natural environment. So we had the site very carefully surveyed. We chose to build this new conference training facility and all the kind of front of house, back of house that it required in what was the existing place so that we didn't in any way disturb the existing ground. All the trees, all the contours, all the etc. were very carefully measured, and then a building design that worked within that. So the phase one, which is what we built, are the public facilities of conference, training, etc. And then those other buildings are the accommodation, which we're now about to move into that phase of building. So the buildings were designed as individual units that are or individual structures that are linked then by this roof, so that they could kind of move between what are the existing trees, at the same time allowing opportunity for making some very interesting spaces between for teaching, so the places of gathering, etc., that are not your usual that you would get at Wits University, not your kind of urban teaching spaces. And there you can see a baobab tree. And so the building kind of moves with the topography, moves between the trees. Some of the trees grow through, and that the natural heritage of the environment, that is very much the thing that is the dominant director of what is going on. We chose very simple means to build, of building, very standard methods of corrugated iron, plywood ceilings, screeded floors, etc., but then allowed them to kind of wiggle and move and become something more interesting within the landscape of this environment, existing environment. Also that this whole process was very much, we converted parts of the existing into, give them new life and new kind of layers of space. Also that it was all built by the local community and very much the local community. There was a lot of kind of interaction on that level, and then how to upskill people as well in the process of making this building. And I think for me how light falls is always an incredibly important thing. It's hot up there, but at the same time you want light, you want kind of dappled shadow. And totally this inside-outside. So the spaces between animals can move, people can move. It's a very wonderful environment to be in. So the last project that we're going to show you is Law on Keys, which is our very recently completed boutique office building for the man with green hair, for a law firm. It's on Keys Mile, Art Mile, which is probably where all the other empty seats people are at the moment. What this building does in many ways is it takes a lot of the themes that we've kind of looked at in competitions, etc., and then brings them in a way into fruition. So I was so excited I bought the book in French. But Patrick Blanc, who started all of this with his marvelous green hair, this idea of planted walls. So there's three kind of ways of making greenery or planting or landscape within the building. The one is this planted wall that becomes the atrium of the building. The other idea is that of planted screens. So these screens screen Jan Smuts Avenue and screen the west light. Clearly it's winter now, so it isn't quite there yet. So it's just been completed, and that's kind of how it will grow in that way. And then the third planting or landscaping device is that of planting all the roofs with felt grass, aloes, and indigenous flowers. The plan showing you Jan Smuts Avenue on this side and Keys Avenue on that side. And it's quite interesting, you know, you build buildings and you get very involved in them, and then you sort of have to step back a bit and look at them and wonder about them. And one of the things that struck me in going through the building was how we had designed this building. If you see on these edges, it's wall, wall, wall. And here was this building for this law firm where there's absolutely no wall. The whole front of the building is completely open. And it's quite wonderful because it never kind of bothered. It's like anti-fear, which for me is a much more kind of urban space, which is, I think, unusual, but completely embraced by the client. And what is also very interesting is that he's kind of taken ownership, if you like, of the whole verge. So he's planted the neighbour, the whole of Jan Smuts Avenue with all this wonderful felt grass and aloes, and he's completely happy to do it because it, I suppose it gives back to his building. It kind of places it in a whole space, but I think it's also, he loves it. It's just, you know, how he is. What you can see here, so that obviously is the entrance with the more kind of public facilities over there, the central atrium with that wall that we were talking about. And then these are the private offices that have this planted screen that kind of goes around them. And whilst some of the space between is outside, some is inside, it all has this decking as the floor. So it's very much this thing between inside and outside and how that kind of integrates. That's the key side of it, and it's kind of quite sculptural nature. So one of I mean, we've been very engaged in the landscaping and briefing the people who've been working on it, etc., and in creating the kind of different characters, if you like, of that and how that works with the building. So that's the street. You just walk on in, which I think is quite wonderful. We also had that's the reception area with the atrium beyond. We did the interiors, which was really quite an undertaking, but I guess fantastic, because then you can script also how that space is used, how it's finished, etc. We curated artwork, we curated all kinds of things, but it really has been quite a wonderful experience, and I think it's not like your average office building built by a developer, etc., etc., and it is very particular to the person for whom it's been designed, and each space is thought about individually, how it might be used, who might use it, and curated as such. That's called Kate's Boardroom. Then this is the library, which is a very important space. So good old-fashioned gorgeous books, and something that in a law firm has kind of gravitas, and that it's very visible. So when your potentially opponents come up this grand stairs to your boardroom, they pass this library, they see that you are people of great stature. So there's also a little bit of posturing that goes on within this. From the library you see across towards the boardroom space, or look down back into the entrance area. That's seeing through to the boardroom. Obviously you can close that all off, but and that carpet was made specifically for us and brought out from India, so it's quite wonderful. And how all of those spaces then relate to that atrium and of those planted. So from every space you have a relationship with what is planted and how that influences the space itself. The private offices with their inside and outside decking that surround them, and the planted screen up the side, which we saw earlier. The fire escapes there also, so nothing is kind of left as unthought of or unthoughtful. And light, again, where light comes from, the role that it plays, how it influences you, very important throughout these works. And then those screens have got This is his PA, and then we move on towards his very own bathroom. Man needs his bathroom. And then into his own studio, his own office, sorry, studio. And so things like we designed furniture, we designed all kinds of things, and it was a very full job, but a really very satisfying one, and a really happy client. So then those curtains all open, and he moves out from his desk, he watches the setting sun, where the screens have been left out, so to speak, so that you do see that setting sun. And his deck, very comfortable establishment. And then looking through that to the top areas where you kind of have outdoor entertainment areas for the people who work there. So that's the outdoor lounge area, and the other one being, we'll get to it now, the dining area, which is that over there with its very own braai. And I think just the kind of sculptural, the attention to detail, the very fine and kind of curated carefully. It's been a wonderful experience making that building. Thank you.